Welcome to State of Consciousness Podcast with your hosts Gabriela Fernandez and Ryu, along with various other community collaborators, who will take you on a journey to explore through their individual offerings and services how they are contributing to the greater shift on the planet. If you are interested in how you can both experience and become a part of this energy, sit back and give a listen as we are all one.
Welcome back to the State of Consciousness podcast. This is episode 6 with Dale Hendricks. Dale has been growing and propagating plants professionally since 1975 when he joined Greenleaf Enterprises in Lancaster, PA. In 1988, he co-founded North Creek Nurseries, along with current owner Steve Castorani, in order to propagate and grow perennials and grasses with an emphasis on natives and garden selections of natives. In 2009, he founded Greenlight Plants LLC to consult on carbon-friendly and regenerative landscapes, growing native, woodland, and permaculture plants regeneratively, organically, and joyfully. He has been honored with the American Horticultural Society's Individual Commercial Award and the Perennial Plant Association's Young Professional Award, and much to his surprise, in November of 2015, the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society presented him with their Award of Merit. He has taught plant propagation at Longwood Gardens and lectures widely. He serves on the founding board of the Sustainable Business Network of Greater Philadelphia and as co-chair from 2004 to 2007. He also served on the founding steering committee with the Native Plants in the Landscape Conference at Millersville University in Pennsylvania. Dale has been a permaculture and biochar advocate and practitioner since 2009 and has presented many workshops and demonstrations in the East and Mid-Atlantic states since that time. In the last few years, he has assisted and taught biochar production as a soil building and clean cooking strategy in Costa Rica and Jamaica. He makes biochar while cooking and gardening and implements it in his compost, soil building, horticultural, and household endeavors. He lives in Landenberg, southern Chester County, PA, with his family, where he gardens, propagates, plants, and works on rewilding, growing the productivity, diversity, capacity, and resilience of the land. We hope that you enjoy this interview with Dale, so let's jump right in. All right, so welcome, Dale, to the State of Consciousness podcast. We're going to go ahead and jump right in and ask you the first question. Can you share with us a little bit about the work you're doing in the community and how you got started, and just a little bit about yourself?
Geez, yeah. Work in the community, that's funny. So let's briefly tell some of the background story. I'm a longtime horticulture guy, plant grower. So I spent a lot of my career doing plant propagation and growing lots of natives and stuff, and being all about the sustainable, diverse, life-friendly landscape, right? And so 10, 12 years ago, I got out of a good-sized nursery that was doing that. And so I could devote myself to my thankfully paid off hippie homestead where I could do more things. So it was only in 2010 that I took up PDC, the permaculture design course. And it just, for one thing, it was led by Ben Weiss out of Lancaster, who gives great PDCs, a good friend of mine. And kind of since then, I've kind of reinvented pretty much everything I did around here, even though it was a kind of a cool hippie landscape. The difference, really, the main difference in adding the permaculture thing was, I dove deep into the rabbit hole of soils and building soil and biochar, making recalcitrant long-term carbon for the soil from the permaculture world. But the main thing I've done is, like before, when you're into the native plant realm, it's great. Your landscape is good for birds, bees, butterflies, water quality, pollinator, yada, yada, but they forget one little detail: humans. So the humans weren't so much integrated in the landscape. I didn't have a lot of food. I have garden here, ornamentals and cool natives here, and kind of beat back the quote unquote invasives in all the time in the rest of the place. So it's a really good system and approach to integrating more human needs in the landscape, right? So that's the direction I've taken, where I liked pawpaws. So I added a lot of pawpaws. Then I realized from, permaculture and plant learnings that, geez, the pawpaws and all the rest of the, trees and shrubs I like weren't evolved to be alone. You just don't have only one thing in the garden. The monoculture model is not a pro-life system in a way. It doesn't make healthy or happy plants for humans. It makes needy plants that the humans have to provide all their inputs. Think of a corn crop, right? But if you grow polycultures, as one way to put it, or plants in guilds, often they can support themselves. You need next to no or hardly any fertilizers. So that was the main outline of what changed when I went more into a permaculture approach. And to say this too, that a lot of us gardeners and plant guys are rather landscape oriented when we talk about permaculture, right? But really, permaculture has the word culture in it, and perma, it's getting at really, really deep changes we need in our society, and the fact that we can do some of these, right? So the idea is that the perma part is our industrial society, particularly industrial farming, is rather destructive. And generally, if you look at history, look at quote unquote the Fertile Crescent. What is it? It's practically a desert, so we in industrial agriculture systems have not taken care of our nests. We destroy habitats in our agriculture. So some of it is addressing this thing where a lot of environmentalists and climate folks are busy saying, oh, there's too many people, we got to get rid of people. Well, is it people or is it culture, right? So that's the big part we go to. That do you mean the natives never contacted in the central Amazon are the problem? Oh no, not them, but they're people, aren't they? So it's the culture that is delivering the problems, and that people can live in regenerative, renewable ways. And how we do our landscape and gardening is a big part of that, but it's not all of it, right? How we build our houses, how we transport ourselves, how we care for each other in community. So all those things are a big part of it, and it's really good to keep that in our minds. That it's just, I love the expression that permaculture is revolution disguised as gardening. So it is a big critique of the system, but then again, how it looks, how it flowers out is different at your place. It's different at Melvina's Center. It's different here. I have a lot of privileges. I'm a white guy in the exurbs that has 12 acres, so, but that doesn't mean you can't, quote unquote, do permaculture in the cities. And when you're not growing many plants, you can support the other growers, you can grow some herbs, you can set up distribution, you can build community around ideas of interdependence and resiliency. So I just want to get all that out. So you're asking me kind of how all that started. That was the quick version.
Well, if I could just interject one moment, because you just brought in some very, very strong points, which I think is really important for our audience to hear, because, first we had, this big push on one side towards people growing their food, and they were still doing it in a very monoculture way, right? The community gardens started popping up in the city areas, right? It's all about putting in these gardens, growing these, vegetables, primarily vegetables, which were just for the season, right? No real conversation around that. In addition to that, then you have the other side for the native folks, right? Anything that's not on the list, right, is taboo.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And a
yeah.
lot of the things that you find in like the food permaculture food forest, a lot of those things aren't necessarily native plants. That's something that I'm going through with helping the Hermitage over in historic Newcastle right now. So, I think these points that you brought up about the relationship component, relationship to human beings, relationship to the environment, I think are really key things that folks um, could pull from the conversation that you're talking about, because oftentimes people who are just getting started with permaculture don't quite get the big differences and the big benefits, right? And you talked about the cultural piece of it, right? Which I think is huge. And so, having said that, if you could kind of elaborate on this a little bit, because I think what's also very important for our audience to hear is, you're a horticulture guy, right? You were in
And, and a
you were
native guy,
in a native guy,
before
right?
natives were fashionable, I was growing them wholesale and pushing them in the 80s,
Right,
so
right.
I'm there on that,
Right. So you were in a, for all intents and purposes, a pretty comfortable spot, but there's something in your mind that said, there's there's more than this. What was that crucial, almost like epiphany, awakening, or awareness that presented itself to you to say, oh wow, I want to go this way instead of staying in this space that I was in, right?
Well, I think you're talking about the native plant movement and permaculture and their relationship. Yeah. So basically, I was already a native plant enthusiast, and in the early days, I remember talking to my buddies, because for every movement that has passionate people, you get enthusiasts and you get fundamentalists.
Mhm.
Then you get others who are traveling along, who are pushing weed killers. Right?
Yeah.
All these people are in the mix, right? So suddenly there's a meetings and great talk about all the threats and damage and all the invasives. Is another warlike language, doesn't sound like insurgents, so all of that thing made just a peace and love hippie like me a little bit uneasy, So I actually tell a story about I was out canoeing with my good buddy cousin and saying, oh, look at that bad plant, invasive plant, blah, blah. And he says, I thought you liked plants. And that was one moment where I realized that plants are like people, right? There's good, bad, and ugly. And if you're a religious person at all, you also think that there are no throwaway, completely ugly plants that just need, or completely so useful they should be made extinct, right? So everything has its place, right? So that doesn't mean a lot of us permies who are big deep into natives want more invasives. We don't. I tear out the Millersville rose and all those things pretty much where I can, but I don't kill them. I don't poison them because I don't want to do the poison treatment. So I kind of live with them. I add the things I want to add, and I, rather than a model of control, which is the Western, we'll call it the white culture, but with the industrial culture, the control culture, like think of a cornfield, right? That's under control, versus stewarding, co-op, and managing whole systems. So that's the other big permy piece, is it's not about the pieces, it's about the system. And so, yeah, we want to be enthusiasts. We want to have both habitat for pollinators, birds, bees, all these things, and people, right? So us people, primarily of the European culture, don't eat a lot of native plants, right? So one job is to add more natives to our diets, which I'm trying to do. The other is to integrate more food of different kinds in the landscape. So we got our chickens, right? So we have mushrooms we're cultivating and encouraging, and other people hunt here. I let them hunt. I get little meat from that. I'm happy about that. So there's different ways to meet our needs while being a gentle gardener and a steward, rather than a grouchy controller saying you don't belong here. So the one little adage I use in this part of the conversation is like, pretend you've got a old native chief who goes to sleep in 1491 and wakes up today, rubs his eyes and says, we'll be polite, holy cats, what the heck happened? What are all these plants? What are they doing here? He might ask in surprise. But then their approach, which the permaculturists try to use, is that, wow, how can I have a relationship with them? Why are they here? What ecological niche are they doing that, or are they occupying that wasn't, when I was 5 centuries ago? How can I have a cooperative relationship and not be at war with the landscape? So that's my view on that piece. We could go into it more if you wish, but there's a lot of different ways to go. We could tell the John Hershey story. We could talk about soils. What are you thinking, Gabby?
Well, you brought up biochar, and I would love for you, if anyone listening isn't familiar, could you give us a little explanation of what biochar is and why you love it?
Yeah, that's a fun one. So happy to. Basically, biochar is a new name. Okay, scientists like specialty names, right? So it used to be called charcoal. Basically, it's charcoal that's in soil, or charcoal that's made on purpose on the way to going into soil. It's just a slice of charcoal that now we're not talking about a fuel or something. We're talking about soils. Okay, so that's number one. It's a simple new definition. But the other fun part is, and this is one of the early rabbit holes I got into, early on in my permaculture journey, is that people talk about the carbon cycle, right? And generally, every time people use a singular tense, what's the reason for this? There's 6 reasons for it. They're all interrelated, right? So the same with carbon cycles, right? So we have to get over the fact, when you're asking for a simple single one thing, you're thinking in the industrial system. You're not entirely with us in your approach, and we just have to all train our minds, and this takes time. And I say the same thing, the cause, and use the singular, but just hear that. So, all the CO2 is up in the atmosphere, right? And there's a good bit too much of it at the moment, and it acts like a blanket, and it makes more warming. Most all that warming so far has been dumped into the ocean, which is the great majority of the land surface. So we're not really feeling all that warming so much yet, right? So, but what plants do, of course, through photosynthesis, the sun shines, the chloroplasts in the plant's leaves make carbon-rich fuel, right? So they make sugar out of the sunshine and CO2. So they suck up the CO2 out of the air. They split water together. That makes a 55% carbon, I believe it is, sugars, or glucose, I think it is one of the sugars. I'm not a scientist. But that sugar is then goes, some the plant needs for leaves, some it needs to make its trunk bigger if it's a tree, some it needs to make bigger roots to spread further, and other parts of that carbon or carbon-rich sugar energy go down into the roots to feed their symbiotic micro critter buddies. So often now I'm hearing roughly during a whole plant's average life, it might be 40% of the carbon-rich sugars are fed into the soil. So it's a two-way flow. So we just talked about at least 3 different carbon cycles, right? So there's one type of carbon that might be in your soil. Think if you put a lot of compost on last year, a lot of that might be gone by this year. Will surely be mostly entirely gone by a second or third year. Now, if you're in the tropics, that happens real fast. Those carbon rich compost pieces are often gone in half a year or less. So where it's hotter, that goes fast. So there's a lot of things that go into the soil that if we disturb the soil, if we leave it bare or we till it, we oxidize it. So we're burning off a lot of the short-term carbon. So the dead roots and dead plant matter parts of the carbon cycle quick, as do the plant exudated parts that are in the humus part of soil that makes it dark. All that's called the labile carbon. That moves fast, and we need it to move fast. It gives energy to the plants. It's all good, but it doesn't last forever, right? So the biochar comes along, and let's say in prairies, you'll have a prairie fire now and then. And that's another favorite question to ask. Are fires good or bad? Well, the fire burns in our car engines. We wouldn't get around as much if we didn't have them there. And fire burns in my wood stove. That's not all bad. So out west, where there's fire-prone landscapes and we haven't let the fires happen, the fuel builds up to where the fire comes and it's ferociously hot. It burns everything all the way down to ash. It sterilizes the soil, makes it run away. That's a destructive fire. You might call it bad. But let's say you have a prairie where every 2-3 years, you might say, oh, it's good and dry. We can burn it before the growing season. That kind of cool fire gives mostly what's left is not white, burnt, sterilized to the ground. Your cool fire will leave a lot of charcoal. So that's one reason the prairie soils are so good, is they have recalcitrant carbon, which is the term for longer lasting carbon, which biochar is. So that black charcoal left over from the prairie fire sifts down. So a lot of the prairie soils are so good, they're still getting good crops from them because 40% or more of the carbon in them is pyrolytic. You know, scientists study it and they can say, oh, this is fire-derived carbon, i.e. biochar. So the fun part about biochar is it's a whole other longer lasting carbon cycle piece of longer lasting carbon that also absorbs, holds nutrients, holds water. So it's a different carbon cycle that, if it's done well, can be very beneficial, right? So around here, what that looks like is basically the process of making charcoal, if you're not burning a prairie, is burning wood halfway. Think of your campfire, right? So the campfire has the flames. The flames are taking a stick of wood and burning it into a glowing coal, right? Now, if you stop the fire when you have only glowing coal, you've got charcoal. Generally, in a campfire, you have all three at once, right? You got flame happening, but the older center parts of the fire are more slowly glowing, and that would burn to ash eventually, and you wouldn't have any charcoal. So all you're doing is burning halfway. That mimics kind of a cooler fire. And there's a zillion different ways. We might not want to get into it now. We'd love to have a longer discussion about this if people are interested. It's fun. But we use it to make the chicken house smell sweet, right? So the charcoal or biochar absorbs things, right? So it absorbs the odors. So it's the best deodorizer. It's in all the filters we have, you know? So this isn't anything really new, but if you scatter lots of charcoal again and again in your chicken house, and then you shovel that out or compost it, then picture rain's coming and rain hits your compost. So if the rain hits your compost that's full of charcoal, a lot more of the nutrients will stay and be held in the charcoal and won't flow away. So it's better for water quality. It's better for holding nutrients. So that's some of the basic bones of why we play with it. It's a fun way to educate about the many carbon cycles. And it's a reminder that up to half the extra carbon up there used to be in soils and ecosystems, right? So if you go back to 1500, I think we have only about 2/3 of the trees we used to have. So we get rid of trees, we reduce ecosystems to fields. If we turn them over all the time, right? Picture a freshly plowed field. What happens is you get sun, you've disturbed all the funguses, micro critters come along and eat this, and they breathe out CO2. So we oxidize the soils we leave bare or the soils we plow or till. So that's why we want to kind of minimize tilling. Maybe not never do it, because it's needed sometimes, but know that it's a strong tool. It's a hammer, right? So, just be aware of that. So did I do okay on Biochar 101 there?
Yeah, and we're making a note here that in the next sequel that we have of you, we're going to have you do a focus on biochar. But thank you for that. And I learned something too about the chicken house. And if I thought about it, yeah, that makes all the sense in the world that it could pull the odors in, because I noticed that your chicken house does have a nice odor in it.
Yeah. So it has an affinity for the carbon, or the charcoal has an affinity for what is it? Methane, not methane, ammonia, I think it is.
Ammonia.
So yeah, so it's a great match.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about the benefits of the polyculture over the monoculture, and I guess the template would be like the food forest concept. That would be, I think, wonderful for folks to hear, because one of the things that you mentioned in the very beginning, it's a lot of times when people hear the word permaculture and having a homestead of some sorts, they think that you have to have these massive acres of space, and some of the benefits of being able to do these permaculture concepts is that you can do them really in any kind of space. And I think this polyculture, monoculture conversation really helps to give people an understanding of that.
Yeah, boy, a lot there. I wanted to write some things down, but I'll try to remember all that
Okay.
thoughts I had about that. So where to start with? One is plants, like people, are givers and takers, right? So if we have monoculture, the plant has to take nothing. It doesn't have any symbiotic buddies to speak of to give to it, right? So, but plants can be mutually supporting, and the one most everyone knows is that a lot of pea family plants fix nitrogen through bacteria in their roots, and so a group of plants can not just build soil with their dead roots and organic matter, but build soil with big nutrients we need, right? So it turns out that most all plants fix some amount of nitrogen, and just not to geek out on chemistry and nutrients in particular, but that
you can geek out if you want.
Well, let me go down this way first. I'll admit that this permaculture approach does not fit in well with the economy. It's hard to do and start. I put pawpaw trees out and planted ramps and other things under them. And, you're talking 5 years where you just might get a few bits of herbs and other cool pollinator benefits before you get anything that could really be called food. Now, some of the first ones I did, I put garlic and edible greens of different kinds in, and sea kale, perennial veggies and whatnot. But nonetheless, I want to decouple our expectations from economics, right? This is a way to have a beautiful and productive landscape for humans and all the micro critters, all the critters, right? So the idea is that you could have many, many different layers. You can have big trees like oak trees or nut trees or persimmons, high canopy trees, right? Then you could have smaller trees like apples, cherries, even mulberries could be your second layer. You could have a lot of different shrubs from big to small. and we have our June berries and other things now, gummies, this and that. So the idea is that landscapes are more beautiful and more productive when the sun shines. One plant can never capture all that sun. If you have two types of leaf things, you'll get more use of that sunshine. You'll get more use of the photosynthesis. And you have 5, 6, 7, 8 or more things. There's research in Germany saying that once you hit 8 or more different species, the plants kind of say, oh, this is a polyculture. This is where I like to be. Oh, I can start sharing and giving and thriving. So there is a magic in building diverse landscapes that looks good. So that, we've talked about this, that people come here and I just have many of these conversations. Oh, my grandmother in Hungary, this looks just like her old-fashioned landscape. It's so sweet. It makes me cry. It's the kind of lived-in landscape that deals humans in that is very pleasing to people, right? So we can't sell that short, but it's also letting people nurture diverse habitats for food and production. So this can be done in a farm scale way. And that's the kind of this John Hershey story we can dig into a little bit, where he was trying to get farmers to grow more trees. So what they did in kind of Western white folks style is grow the trees in rows. So when they're young, you can plow or till or graze your sheep or whatever in between, right? And if you do that right, you can actually build soil and do good. And if you have enough fencing, you can keep the animals off your trees as they're growing. And as time goes by, you might have a more narrow row in between. But what you're adding long-term then is a diverse food. So, this guy liked having, right now it's mulberry season. I've got more mulberries than I can take care of by a long shot. Makes the chickens and all the other animals happy, and pigs love them to death. And then later on, you might have persimmons and you might have honey locusts. So you can plan to have a sequential harvest of tree crops. But again, that takes time, but you can do a polyculture of a farming type approach in between that's now called agroforestry. So this guy, John Hershey from Downingtown, another whole talk perhaps, or rabbit hole, kind of founded this. And he was in a book that was called Tree Crops, A Permanent Agriculture. And that was last published in 1955. So the Aussies who invented permaculture and the term admitted they borrowed the phrase from that Tree Crops book, where he called it a permanent agriculture. So that's where the name came from, that book called Tree Crops by J. Russell Smith. And this guy, John Hershey, going back to the 1920s to the 1960s, was in there as, hey, this guy is doing it. Isn't this great? He has all these improved varieties of trees. Let's do more of this. So there's many ways to do the food forest idea. Malvina's got her own version going, many others do in many places. Farmers are getting into it as there's more and more grants for farm scale work. There's a guy you might want to interview called Austin Unruh, UNRUH. He has a business in Pennsylvania nearby called Trees for Grazers. So he's using the grants for tree planting in riparian areas, right? Riparian is creekside or stream side. But often you can get a grant to plant up to 300 feet on either side of even a little creek. So you look at all the little creeks around here and you add 300 feet on either side, you can have half your farm planted in agroforestry under grants. So that's his angle. So there's many ways into this for different scales of what you're doing. But I kind of am shy to promote the idea of food forests for urban types who want to look at things right away. It's a longer term project, and this guy John Hershey has done this, but his food forest was for his farm animals, not so much for humans, right? So the farm animals would have a little shade, diverse crops falling down that would make it more drought proof. But mulberries, they have way too much bird poop on their Mercedes Benzes and whatnot. So, not all of this is a great fit for people's impatience and their ethics and aesthetics. So part of our job is to get people to see how abundant the world is and how we can make a huge amount of abundance. So now I'm overwhelmed. I can't harvest all the food that's here, so do we want to be busy complaining about the price of persimmons at the supermarket, or do you want to bend over and pick some up off the ground? So I don't know. I'm kind of wondering now. So maybe focus me a little more on this.
Okay. Well, I think one of the key things that you had mentioned is, and I liked your emphasis in the very beginning, that this is kind of a time type piece, because I know my experience here is that I've been slowly building and integrating with the guidance from you and others along the way. And then all of a sudden, 10, 12, 15 years later, I look up and there's all this abundance around me. It's like it's exploded, right? It just exploded. And I'm like, where did all this come from? And then, I've had my head down diligently, doing all this work, but initially, no, it was crickets, right? And there is a bit of an investment around this, right?
And
Up front.
Yeah, a lot of it that goes to the people part, right? So I wrote down, people want permaculture, like, Dale, bring this to my house. I'm going to hire you and you're going to give me permaculture. No, I would put, I want permaculture, or I want to do permaculture, right? So it's a matter of what is our society crying out for in many ways is meaningful work for young people. That is physical, right? So I think one of our main problems with drugs and violence and all the problems we have are people are at the screens too much, they're inside too much, they lack what I call meaningful, hopeful work. So this thing kind of helps close that circle where there's all manner of stewarding. You can weed this, you can beat these guys back, you can make a fire and make some charcoal, you can plant these guys. So you can do many different tasks that make a hopeful, meaningful either day's work or lifetime. So it is a lot about the activity, and we gotta deal ourselves back into the garden, to risk of sounding like a Woodstocky or a hippie, I've heard of people like that,
Yeah.
So
and you're absolutely right, I think. And it becomes a lifestyle shift, and I think it pulls us back to, where we were originally, but at the same time, it gives us an appreciation for our connection and the relationship, because you mentioned that a couple times. It seems so much about relationship and interconnectedness and having this awareness. When you're out there in the garden and you're seeing all these little creatures and beings, and you're paying attention to all these different plants, and you're realizing you as this human being, are like connected to all of these things. And it draws appreciation, and your orientation towards how you interact with all those beings shifts, right? And then it starts to peel back your layers in many ways.
Yeah, I think the discussion's a lot like, when we were kids, my God, germs were bad, right? So now we realize, oh my God, we die tomorrow without germs, quote unquote, because they provide our immune system, they aid our digestion, and yada, yada, yada. So the same with all the micro critters in the soil. We are always told, oh, soil pathology, this bug is doing this, So a lot of it is losing our fear and going forward with a more hopeful attitude about getting my grandkids in the mud and, having the microbiome of eating the mulberries off the tree and even one or two that fall on the ground. Oh my God. So that microbiome view applies broadly everywhere. And it's enervating, it's encouraging, and it's fun. So I just realized I didn't cover one piece that you just said about my work in the community, so I'm not as formal in my work in the community as you or some others. I don't find myself, you'll see when, in my bio that I have done a lot of things out in the world, with the Sustainable Business Network of Philly and with native plant conferences and all this. But right now, my main work is what I'm doing at home, doing a little grandchild care a couple of days a week, but both mentoring a lot of young garden folks and building we call it the hippie homestead here. I probably need a better phrase for it, but having all manner of PDCs, permaculture design courses, come here for a day. We'll visit, we'll do some talks, hosting other people to give talks and workshops. So just kind of smaller retail level things, but I love to give talks, podcasts, go to conferences, talk about this stuff. So I'm kind of a part-time educator, part-time out. I still have the tiny micro enterprise nursery, but it's shrinking all the time as Pappy cruises into his 71st year here. So, I'm trying to not grow 50 billion things in gallon pots I've got to schlep around forever, trying to say, oh yeah, Zach's growing this and Donna's growing this. And I have a whole group of young buddies, and including this tree guy I mentioned, Austin. So I'll grow some bare root trees from these John Hershey seedlings and sell them bare root to him rather than pots. So, just a million ways. So I'm kind of this diverse character. I don't know how to quantify it the most general purpose, permy cheerleader, old geezer.
Well, I see you kind of like is the iteration that we all in this community want to get to, because you've created this energy through your demonstration and the energy that you carry that draws people to you. It's almost like you don't even have to go out and reach out to folks, right? You've established yourself so much through demonstration and this heart-centered energy that you emit that it just draws people to you, whether they're drawn to you to say, hey, come do a podcast or come do a talk or come be part of my PDC, or can I come and see your homestead and see. I remember the first time I came up to see your place, and I was introduced to you by a mutual friend, of course, and I was blown away. It just made it made sense out of my world, because I was able to kind of fit this concept, whether you want to say it's from my present existence as a human being or incarnations prior to that, but it's like the world made sense to me when I came up to your homestead, right? And because I tend to be very sensitive to energy also, it was like a symphony for me. When I came up there, everything was talking and it just permeated through my whole system. And I think that's the energy that you carry, and you're always, as busy as you are, you're always so welcoming. You always have a willingness to help folks, and people feel that, right? Plus you've got this knowledge base that's ridiculous, right? So this idea about, I'm not going out there and doing stuff. You're the ultimate, whether you want to say derivation or whatever of what happens when people are in the practice of this, right? And then they can just sit as Buddha, right? And be a presence. And then people are feeling welcome to come and be part of that presence. And, I'm just so grateful and thankful, that I met you. And I talk about you all the time as being one of my primary mentors, and the things that I have learned from you have been astounding. And then the idea that I've gotten a chance to share my mentor with my students, right? And then them have the same experience, right? This is like legacy stuff that you're doing, Dale. Like, so I'm gonna toot your horn because you are a very humble being, and that's what draws people to you. But you are developing legacy around this, whether somebody calls it permaculture, indigenous practices. I think it's the heart-centered relationship that we should have to everything. And you demonstrate that, and learning from you becomes very easy because people feel that before they, listen to and try to understand all of the scientific terms, right? Because I think folks need to be able to make that connection. So yeah, that's my view of you, and that's why I'm so, it's so cool for me to have gone through this learning in my life and then actually be able to sit on a podcast and interview my mentor,
Well,
and have
you're,
them get a chance to talk, right? So,
you're
so
way
there
too
you have
kind.
it.
Well, we all do what we can, and I don't, toot my own horn. Yeah, and I'm grateful when others feel like they want to. And also the other thing is I recognize that I have a lot of privileges. So to those whose a lot is given, we kind of have a obligation or opportunity to share, right? So again, it's part of the abundance, like you were saying, we create so friggin' much abundance, we either gonna go to waste or share. And in a way that applies to how we deal with the humans too, is that I look at myself as a coach, a mentor, an encourager of folks, and it's a joy. So I guess it's part of. I hate to admit it, but being an elder, I've gotten old enough that in either in the way or you're doing some good, So thank you for that. And I'm just looking at other notes from the talk I gave. I just want to look them over. How we doing on covering things?
We're good. We're good. We're good. We're just rolling along. Gabby, did you have any more immediate? Because I got myself all wound up there a little bit talking about Dale. This little voice inside me is going, okay, that's enough. That's enough. That's enough.
Well, yeah. How to put it? Well, the world really is alive and interconnected, right? So it's neat that people like you are into the healing and the energies, and people like me who not so much in the energies but in creating one facet of the diamond in my landscape and work here, all are pointing in that direction where the natives were right. The trees do talk to each other. Now the scientists have finally proved it, right? So now we know, the soil is alive. So we now know that you're not just hallucinating. You're probably more sane than the person who says, nothing going on here. It's not what the single thing I expect. You're tuned into the health of the system and the harmony. That the fact is that it's more than 100 years ago that Einstein put us on the quantum worldview, right? But we still look at a Newtonian worldview. This does this does that, simple cause and effect. But once we get into appreciating and creating complex systems with a stewardship angle and a long-term angle with some faith and some work and some fun, seeming miracles start to happen. And that's, I think, what we're all getting at here,
Yeah.
So Gabby, have we were there more questions that you sent me? I have long forgotten.
Well, we always ask all of our guests, and you've already shared a lot about this, but if you have any other words that you want to share regarding why you think this work is important and contributing to the future and to the world. And
Well, yeah, I kind of said it fairly well. It is the kind of thing humans need because we've gotten away from our creaturehood a lot, right? So this approach, when I'm out there, I'm not dressed without my little clippers, right? Or maybe a bowl to collect some berries in or whatever. So those landscapes we engage with are the kind of habitat that we're really meant to have, that a lot of people are tuned in to feel them. So that's a great honor and a great pleasure, right? And so I'm sad when I read, oh man, the insect are down 50-70% around the world, whatever, but they are not here. My lightning bugs are happy, and I have fairly diverse butterflies. And I know that that's all part of a bigger systems thing, and my little corner is way too small to save species, but making a haven is another part of the joy. So I would say the other thing is that I'm always reticent to apply too much science or vernacular language about gardening and permaculture, because I want to invite people. So whenever they read my bio, I say, it makes me sound like a big high priest. Really, I'm a philosophy major dropout who's found horticulture and permaculture just by accident, So we have to remember that everyone's grandmother and grandfather were gardeners. So that this is essentially, if you're into the Bible, that's where we come from, right? Where nature meets culture. And so don't be intimidated, jump in. And the other thing about all this is that, like Melvina said, those like myself and herself and Bob Daniel and zillions of others of our friends love to talk about it and love to share this. So it's not either wise or kind to be standoffish or skimpy with our knowledge, so try it, dig in, have fun, have faith, ask people, and people are happy to help generally, very much so. And if they're not happy to help, they might not be the people you need to cooperate with, so there's whole realms of people care here that we haven't gotten into so much, but Melvina kind of touched on that a bit. So we really need to emphasize commonality, to be kind to each other. Another adage I might use is that permaculture is about people who just take responsibility for their carbon footprint, their landscape footprint, their lives in a big way. They don't wait for the market to deliver the perfect green solution or the government to save us from climate change. And a lot of us realize that. There's a great book that Charles Eisenstein wrote on that topic called Climate, a New Story, right? That and the permaculture is very much tuned into that that idea that there's many interlocking challenges, right? So we get our carbon right, we still have Roundup or glyphosate in every mother's breast milk in the world, right? We still have oceans that are acidifying and dying from overfishing. We still have soils we're losing. So we need to have an integrated approach. If we just have the industrial approach and concentrate on carbon only and forget the fact that a lot of that carbon piece is not just about energy. Half of it is about how we care for the landscape, and to deal that part in gives 3, 4, 5, 6 interlocking solutions. And that's the direction we want, rather than tightly controlled 15-minute cities where you have control and technology everywhere. It doesn't seem like paradise to me. So, there's a wide variety of views on all these things in the permaculture community. but I kind of come down on the side of a bit of room and freedom to live as we wish, and certainly not doing harm. We're some of the kindest folks. We try to be out there. So, so some of the high-tech controls are a little troubling, so that's another whole topic for another time. But that might, circle us around pretty well. I don't know. I'm at your disposal.
Yeah, and I think those are really valid points there, because I really feel we're at this crossroads right now that we've probably seen historically over many, many years, where it's the science and nature, or the technology and nature conversation. And some of the things that make me a little squeamish, Dale, I have to admit, are these so-called green cities that seem to be popping up in our conversation, right? And nature just feels like it's being removed totally out of that. It's connection to our broader ecosystems feel like it's totally being removed out of that, and cleansed. And so these things, I think, have repeated themselves. I think we've done stuff like this in the past, right? And it failed, so we're almost like at this crossroads where, here we go again.
Yeah, oversimplified technological solutions are almost always going to bring unintended consequences we can't always see. Some of them we can almost kind of see in advance, but circle back to the kind of landscapes we're talking about vis-a-vis these green cities of control is what makes our souls sing is being immersed in the landscape, and I don't see that in such highly controlled environments. You've got your trees, you got your shrubs, but you have too many people to interact in the way we get nourishment from interacting, in the way we've been describing.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have to just feel our way through. But the way I look at it is I resist authoritarian oversimplification. Okay. Nothing's that simple.
Right.
The invasives are not there because they're evil, right?
Right.
And the whole environment can't be reduced to one molecule of carbon,
Right.
way more, many different things. If you concentrate on one thing, you're going to get an industrial solution that looks like a future problem. So just another good new expression I have,
Right.
and especially when someone comes at you with both an emergency and the solution, oh, it's an emergency. You don't have to think anymore. Do this. So that's the authoritarianism in a nice disguise. So,
yeah. I'm right there with you. Well, I think that this is a really good summation point for us to be right now, because you've, in a very short period of time, brought forth a lot of key things for people to think about, with a lot of punch, vigor, and heart, which I expected from you, Mr. Hendricks.
Well, I am a philosophy major dropout after all.
Yeah, you were definitely the philosopher. So, and there are a lot of things like we've been writing down throughout this conversation that we would want to, talk to you some more about in a next sequel. It's so cool. But I think what you've been able to do is present folks a very basic understanding around this, and move towards maybe even a more evolved understanding, but also really emphasize to folks the interrelationship and the interconnectedness, which, this is what this awakening is all about. People, we've been kind of, our minds have been tainted a little bit to think that things are separate and separate is good. But, people are waking up to the fact that it's not just our connection to each other, but it's our connection to everything around us, and that symbiotic relationship that you continuously mentioned from the very beginning of the conversation, how the plants interact when all of a sudden they realize they're in community. I thought that was awesome. They realize they're in community. They're like, hey guys, look, our friends are here, and they start acting in a different way. And I've seen it here on my homestead. It's just like, boom, why do I have pawpaws that are only 4 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot high producing fruit right now? Because there's other ones around, that are older, and other trees. And first time I saw that, I was freaking out. I remember when I reached out to you, and I'm like, they're not supposed to be producing fruit for like another couple years. They're not even tall enough, and there's big pawpaws dangling off, right? So yeah, I really firmly believe that nature reflects back to us, and nature teaches us, and that's what you were talking about throughout this conversation, and helping people to understand on a, like I said, a very basic level, how important that connection is. And I'm grateful for this conversation today. This has been wonderful.
To be continued, and Charlie's here.
Tell him I said hi.
Yeah, well, he's out listening to music now, but I think he's on your podcast list too.
Yes, we have him. We have him on the list too, so it'll be another really great conversation. So,
why don't you tell the listeners where they can find you if they want to learn more, or I don't know, are you taking new consultations or have any upcoming workshops or events? Yeah.
I'm speaking for the York County Master Gardeners in a while, but that's through the Penn State Extension. I don't know how publicly that is, but you can kind of Google that, or I could follow up with you. I don't have a lot of local things coming soon. The last Saturday in July, we're going to have Janice Kelsey here, who you ought to also add to your list. She's with a group called solarcities.eu. They do biogas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, small scale biogas for homesteads, and they built biogas reactors where you can make cattle poop or kitchen garbage and make cooking gas from it. And they've done that for refugee camps and things around the world. So they're at a small scale thing. The farmers now are doing this, where they have a CAFO, a big, humongous outfit, and they collect all the poop. And we're so green, we're making gas out of it. But the cows aren't living good lives. They're concentrated. They're not healthy.
Okay.
But nonetheless, on a small scale, a lot of things are great at a sane small scale. Like look at biochar. I don't know if I would want it to get big and successful like ethanol, right? So do I want single monoculture plantations of GMO trees just to make biochar? I don't think so. So everything has a good and bad, and a lot of it revolves around its scale. Anyway, I forget how we got on this topic. How did we get on this topic? Biogas. Oh yeah, reaching out. So they can email me, Dale at greenlightplants.com. I kind of avoid most consulting for people. I kind of know what I can do here. I can, as a friendly guy, visit your place and maybe recommend some plants, but I'm really not your designer guy. I don't make nice drawings, and I kind of know what would make me happy, but I don't always know what going to make you happy. And it would have to be a really good fit for me to do stuff like that. Generally speaking, we'd have.
I have found my relationship with you and the relationships that you form in general are very organic, right? I mean, it's and I think about the relationship that I have with you, and then others, that I have worked with, and then I have, sent them your way. It's generally, this intentional organic type thing, which I think is more valuable in many ways, because it's not forced, and it's like the people who are coming from each side are coming with a similar intention.
Sure.
So,
and that's not to say I wouldn't help someone designed or landscape, but it would have to be very thought through. It's not my main thing, but I know I have a lot of knowledge, and I'm not cheap about it. It's just that life is full, like I said, 2 days a week of grandparent care lately, and then you add in taking care of the things, doing a little hiking and canoeing, being a good house husband, all these things. I don't want to get so busy living a tycoon life again, which I've done once, been there, done that. So I call myself a recovering horticultural industrialist.
Well, we're glad that you successfully got through recovery.
That doesn't mean I'm always well behaved, but
that's a whole nother subject. That's for a sequel. That's for a sequel out, a couple sequel outs. We can have that discussion.
The bio is there. It's been an interesting life. It's a great joy, and an honor to do this. I hope the word spreads, and you guys have been a joy to work with, and to be continued.
Yes, absolutely. It's been a wonderful honor for a wonderful conversation. Very much appreciate you, Dale Hendricks.
Oh, shucks. Well, as they say in Landenberg, big hugs. And and to you, Gabby. I'm going to sign out for the moment with hugs and greetings.
Okay. We'll see you. Thanks for joining us at State of Consciousness Podcast. We hope you enjoyed spending time with us and look forward to the next time. Until then, if you'd like to stay connected, you can feel free to reach out to us via our website at www.innersourcewellnesscenter.com. There you will find links to our podcasts, our Facebook page, and our YouTube channel, as well as our mailing list. Stay connected, stay positive. Namaste.